welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Welcome to Syosset Library's Turn the Page podcast. My name is Jessikah. I am your host today, and coming to us from Ireland is the author of Dirty Laundry. Will you please introduce yourself to us and tell us about this really juicy book about people's dirty laundry?
Hi, I'm Disha Bose, and I'm the author of Dirty Laundry. And I grew up in India, but I live in Ireland now. My husband is Irish, so we decided to settle here. And so the book is based in Ireland. It's based in a small coastal village in Ireland, and it follows a group of young mothers. So there are three main characters. One is Kira. She's a social media influencer. So she's the popular one. She has everybody's love and adoration, and she gives people advice on skincare and motherhood and fashion, etc. And then there's Lauren, who's the social outcast. So she's lived in the village all her life, but she's kind of been ostracized by the community for being from the wrong side of the tracks, and maybe for having red hair and too many freckles, wearing hand-stitched clothes and things like that. And even though they've all grown up now, the women still kind of roll their eyes behind her back and make fun of her for her alternative hippie parenting styles. And then there's Mishti, who's an Indian housewife, and her husband is a lecturer at university. And they're in an arranged marriage. So her parents have picked her husband for her. And she's an outsider, really, but fortunate for her, she's been taken under Kira's wing, and they're in this almost toxic, symbiotic relationship where Mishti's found this popular friend, while Kira is, she recognizes that Mishti has nobody else. And she's found a loyal friend, someone who won't gossip behind her back. And very early on in the book, Kira's found dead in her home, seemingly under mysterious circumstances. And the rest of the book then tries to uncover who could be responsible for her death.
So it's interesting. First of all, like, all of the characters are really interesting. The fact that you have this character in Kira who's an influencer, and you know, like, she's an influencer in more ways than one. Like, she has this following, but within, like, it's one thing to have a following on the internet and to have people who quote unquote follow you and like you and appreciate your advice. But one thing I thought was really interesting, and maybe this is one of the reasons why she's really hip to sort of try to win over both Mishti, and she tries with Lauren, is that she is kind of quite lonely and empty. Like, she's a really empty person. And, you know, Mishti, like you said, she recognizes an isolation in Mishti. And, you know, like, instead of being like, I feel really isolated, and this, you know, here's this woman who comes from India. I believe she came from Calcutta. Yeah. You know, I'm not going to, it's almost like she sees Mishti as an opportunity to kind of like be, God, I hate to say it this way, but it's like she's patting herself on the back for taking Mishti under her wing. Absolutely. And yeah, like, look at me. I think at one point she's just like, would anybody really believe that we're friends? It's like, well, geez, Kira, why wouldn't they? What exactly is it about Mishti that you think, you know, whatever? She's looking to influence her. She's looking to be like, look at me, this amazing person, and I'm taking this, you know, poor woman who's in an arranged marriage under my wing. But at the same time, she's playing Mishti also. So, on that level, it's like, geez, well, why would any of them want to kill her? Why would Mishti want her dead? And then with Lauren, like, she knows she's an outcast. She's used to being an outcast. And even though, like, she's not okay with it on certain levels, Kira's almost like, like the newcomer to the neighborhood. She's like, listen, I know what I'm about in this neighborhood, and I don't care what you have to offer. Like, I don't want your popularity. I'm already unpopular. Whatever, go away. And that annoys Kira because Kira's wants to be adored. So it's just this really interesting just combination of people wrapped in this toxicity while they have their own toxicity going on in their home lives.
Yeah, and I feel like I've always been interested in female friendships and the politics of it, and I've traveled a bit. My dad was in the Air Force, so even as a child we were moving around a lot, and I always had new friends. Every town that we went to, I had to start all over again and go through that mechanics of trying to find new friends. And I've never, even to this day, I don't have any like old childhood friends. And I think that's what's really interested me. And even when we moved to Ireland, I had to start all over again, and I find that it's the same everywhere. In Ireland, in India, I lived in the UK for a bit, in New Zealand, and everywhere it's the same. It's the same human interactions on repeat, the same patterns, and women interact with each other differently, men do it differently, women and men interact in a certain way. And yeah, like you said, with Mishti, I feel like she's an outsider in so many ways. She's in an unhappy marriage as well, and she's isolated. And Kira has been isolated all her life. She grew up on this small, isolated farm, and her parents weren't happy. And she made a decision very early on in her life to find a rich guy. That was her aim. And she did. With Jerry, she found a man who was going to look after her, and now she's free to do the rest, which is influence people. And with Lauren, she's encountered a blockage in her path because she won't kind of bend to her ways. And she tried, like I said, when she met Lauren at the start, she tried to influence her and get her on her side, but Lauren wouldn't have it because she's so accustomed to people taking a stand against her. And it kind of just spiraled out of control, their relationship. And yeah, Mishti and Kira are very interesting. They were very interesting for me to write as well, because I could see myself in Mishti in a lot of ways, even though our life experiences are different. As a person of color, you do encounter that. And I think there's always that thought in the back of your mind, am I just the token brown friend? That does cross, I think, our minds a lot. And maybe that's where I got the idea.
Well, yeah, like that was one of the things that like really just struck me about Kira when it's like, Kira, you are literally saying to Mishti, you're my token brown friend. I mean, It was like, it was so cringe inducing. And it's like, you are talking about her like she's like not a full person, and she's literally sitting right there, and it's like, I'm bracing you with my friendship. Man, but again, like, she was just a really well written character too, because Kira is just very empty and very, very alone in spite of the amount of followers that she had. And then there's also the men in their lives, there's their children. They all have children. As a mother myself, like, mom culture is kind of mean. And I guess I'm kind of Lauren in the sense that, like, everybody's always trying to get me to join moms groups, and I'm like, no.
No, and it's one dark hole after the other. I
friends who have kids, and I can reach out to them if I have questions, and they know they can do the same. But I really just don't want to be involved in online forums where literally everybody is telling me everything I'm doing wrong, or what I should be spending my money on, or how much, like, I don't know, like, mom bod I have. It's, what my skin should look like. Like, no, I just, that's the kind of stress a mother doesn't need in their life and a person doesn't need in their life. But mom online, mom influencer culture is huge, and it's impossible to get away from it, even if you're not joining the groups. So, I could imagine, like, having somebody like Kira in the neighborhood is like almost like the eye of the storm. It's sort of it's drawing everybody into her orbit, and it's very hard to stay out, even if you are Lauren and you really, really want to stay out. So yeah, with the men, you have Jerry, who is the rich guy who Kira married, and he's almost like seems like a spectator in their life, which which is interesting, because Kira likes spectators, even though she's kind of iffy on Jerry. You have Parth, who is Mishti's husband, and I don't want to talk too much about him, but he's interesting. And then you have it was Sean, I believe, right, who is Lauren's baby daddy. And he's he's like very rock star and
serial cheater.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. But like, it's a lifestyle, and on one hand Lauren's tired of it, on the other hand she's like
drawn to him as well.
Yeah, and it's there's something about being like, even though you're already an outcast, being that woman who's like, well, my husband is this bad boy, and
I bagged him.
Totally, 100%. So it's almost like her, like, this is on brand for me, and you're going to talk about me anyway. So that was interesting too. How did you sort of put together the men that were going to come together in their lives?
Well, I wrote the women first, and it's interesting that you mentioned mom culture, the mom social media culture, because I wrote the book in lockdown, when I literally had no access to the outside world other than my phone. So I was kind of silently lurking on, Instagram and Facebook groups. And I didn't know that I was subconsciously building the characters in my head. And then when the idea for the book came to me and I was writing the characters, the women came to me very easily, because I'd already gathered these characters online. And I don't know, with the men, I feel like it happened very organically. I was thinking about who Kira would marry because I was working on her backstory. And it made sense that she would find that successful, polished, rich guy. But that she would still be unsatisfied, that she'd still be looking for more. And no matter who she's with, she'd always be sad and lonely and just not satisfied. And with Lauren, I felt like she would be drawn to the bad boy, and because she's alternative and a bit different, that someone like Sean, he was a bookstore owner, a serial cheater, a bit scruffy around the edges, that he would be drawn to her. But he's a city boy and she's from the small village, and she brings him back home. And he's unhappy in this village. She's still ostracized by the community. So there's that dynamic. And with Parth and Mishti, it was very easy to make that relationship on the page, because I've seen that so often in real life growing up in India, where, women are kind of married off to the best suitable boy, just on paper. All that's needed is he needs to be a bit successful, comes from a decent family. Everything else is secondary, whether they get along, whether there's any chemistry. So Parth seemed very ready-made to me, because I've seen that relationship so often, and the men happened very organically as I went along. The women, I'd say, was definitely something that I had to work harder on.
I mean, you did a really, really good job. And that's interesting that you wrote this during lockdown. Man, how was lockdown in Ireland, because I know that across the pond in Europe, I had some friends at the time who were living there, and I know, I mean, like here, you
Yeah.
can't you can't keep people in their house. I was happy to be in the house for
Yeah.
a while, you know, but like I knew people who were like, oh, I snuck out and I went to a party. And it's like, well, first of all, you didn't sneak out, you're an adult, you did what you did, but also like
Yeah.
this was literally the beginning of lockdown and you could be spreading something or
Yeah.
getting something. How was it, and how did it kind of affect just, you know, the writing process? Did you feel really motivated to write?
Mm. Um, the lockdown in Ireland, I think it's because the country's small, population is small. Everybody stayed at home. I know it was a bit different in the UK, but in Ireland, mostly, as far as I know and I could see, everybody stayed home. And we kind of went in and out of lockdown. So we'd have lockdown for a couple of weeks, and then we'd have a break for a week or two. And then the numbers would surge again, and we'd be back again. So, and we had a 1-year-old at the time. And I'm obviously here, my whole family's in India, and we weren't living anywhere close to my husband's family either. So we were totally isolated, and that's how I felt anyway. And my husband was still going to work. So I was stuck at home with a 1-year-old. And as a new parent, I think you're anyway filled with so much self-doubt and just not knowing what to do. And every time she cried, or every time I couldn't put her to sleep, or didn't know how to pacify her, it felt like I was spiraling out of control, to be honest with you, which is why I think I turned to social media, because it seemed like the only access to information or support that I could get. I didn't have the village that you need to raise a child. That was completely lacking for me. But thankfully, I was able to channel that into the book, I think. And that's why there's a very, the sense of isolation and darkness, I think, it just comes from the circumstances that I was in. But to be honest, the interactions that I was seeing online, I saw that in real life as well. Like after we were out of lockdown and I was back to the playgrounds and the yoga classes and the mommy toddler groups, it's just, um, I think social media is a microcosm and just a small version of what really does happen in real life.
Yeah, definitely. I think you're right. And yeah, I mean, in general, because I think social media was the only interaction back then, it did kind of put a magnifying glass on people. I mean, a lot of people were showing sides of themselves that they probably wouldn't have, which was very interesting. But anyway, yeah, no, this was a really good book. I wanted to ask, before we close out, I wanted to ask about pacing, because it's different perspectives, and every perspective gives a few more breadcrumbs into what's going on and where things are going. Were you always writing it as, from different point of views, and did that sort of help with the pacing?
Yes, definitely. Like I said to you, I had the characters first before I had the actual story. I had the ending and I had the characters. So I had to kind of work backwards from there. So the way I wrote the book was basically how the book is now presented, because I was kind of building the characters. And as I was building the characters and their backstories, the story itself emerged. And I think more than focusing on the mystery aspect of the book, I was definitely focused on building the characters and just showing their interactions and their lives and the fallout of being a social media influencer and being in those mommy groups. So yeah, I think I definitely did it on purpose, but it also happened organically because I myself was discovering the story as I was going along and just from different perspectives.
Well, this is a really good book. I think people are going to love it. I'm hoping that you write something else in the future. I don't know if you are working on anything or if you have anything in mind, but
Yeah, I'm working on my second book, but it's not happening as quickly as the first one, which I wrote in 8 weeks because I was under lockdown.
I mean, listen, I don't think that's the norm, but that's fine. I really think, people are really going to like this one. This book has a lot of appeal. Thrillers, especially domestic thrillers,
Mhm.
are just they're really, really good reads. And I think that because we're all coming now from a time when we were in lockdown and
Mhm.
the domestic, we were like almost living our
Yeah.
own domestic thrillers, even if they weren't really that thrilling, even if like the thriller was like, oh man, we ran out of wine.
Yeah. And
Or
then
I
you have
can't
the
watch another
background music, like
yeah, or I can't watch another episode of Bluey, or I'm gonna throw myself out a window. Like I think that we all had that feeling. So I think that this is like just a really good time for domestic thrillers, and people are really gonna like Dirty Laundry. So thank you so much for writing it.
thank
Thank
you
you
for
for
having
joining us.
me.
Yeah, no problem. So once again, this was Jessica with Syosset Libraries Turn the Page podcast. Our guest today was,
Disha Bose, author of Dirty Laundry.
and we are going to close this chapter of Turn the Page.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.